transparent it. Let's save it. Now, let's start working with fingers. I modeled this character with his fingers splayed out a little bit, so it'll make it easy once we do the skinning. I can make one finger and then we can duplicate it to the rest of them. To make the fingers, I like going in the top view. And I'll make one finger and we're going to duplicate it for the other ones. So I'll hit the skeleton tool and I'm going to hold shift and click once for each knuckle and then once for the end of the finger and hit enter. Now this doesn't quite line up with the rest with the geometry, so I'm just going to rotate it. Also, since we made it from the top view, let's take a look at the front view, and once again we need to move our finger joints up. We want our finger joints to be in the middle of the geometry. And let's name our finger joints. Oop, forgot to name my head joints. Let's do that. This one's neck. This one can be neck 2. Head. And then end of head. For my fingers, I'll have this be, this one's the ring finger, ring. Or if you want to save yourself some typing, let's go to modify, search and replace names. Let's change joint and change it to ring. How about let's put a left in it as well. Apply. So let's get rid of these numbers. This one can be ring 1, ring 2, ring 3, ring 4. And then we can just duplicate this. Hit Control D and we'll move this to our pinky. Now our pinky is a little shorter, so I'm going to make my move tool go to local space. Double click on the move tool. Oh, it's already set to local. That's good. And I'm going to move it in X to match up with the geometry. Move in X just a little bit because my pinky's shorter. And I'll use the search and replace names, modify, search and replace names. Let's change ring to pinky. Apply. Duplicate this, Control D again. This is going to be our index finger. We'll rotate it and then move it. W button is the shortcut to move. Change this, modify, search and replace names. We're going to change ring to index. Apply. Take off that 1 at the end. Oh, that's the middle finger. Here, let's just move this down. Save us some typing. Let's duplicate this one more time. This one will be our middle finger. Rotate it to match. Move the joints so they match up with the cuts. I put cuts in the geometry to help your fingers bend. So I match up the knuckles to that. I'm going to change index, modify, search and replace names. I'm going to change index and make it be middle. Hit apply. And last but not least is the thumb. Thumb's a little trickier. I'm going to duplicate my index finger, move it over here, and we're going to rotate it to match where the thumb is. The base of it's going to be where the meaty part moves, and you may not be able to have your thumb be totally straight. You might need a little bend in your thumb to make it match the geometry. So I'm going to rotate it and we'll move this to match. Something like that'll work. Now let's look in the perspective view. You notice I modeled the thumb down at about a 45-degree angle. So I want to rotate this down to about a 45-degree angle in Z so it'll match. That seems to work pretty well. Maybe I need to move it a little bit in Y to match it up better. That looks okay. Now when you rotate joints, you want to make sure you freeze the transformation. I'm going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and that gets rid of all the rotation on the joint. That makes that its own 0 point, but it won't get rid of the translation. Joints, even when you modify and freeze their transformations, their joint translation still stays, because that is how a joint knows how far away from its parent it is. So now that we have the joints there, we want to make sure that all of our joints have X going down their main axis, because when I select the joints, I want to be able to select all of them except the end one, curl it in Z, and make a fist. Let's try that on the thumb. If I select all my thumb joints except the end one doesn't have its orientations match up, and rotate it in Z, it doesn't quite make a fist. So I want to take the joint's orient, the way it's going to rotate, and rotate that about 45 degrees to change a joint's orientation while still keeping the joint in the same place. We just don't want to rotate it, because that'll rotate the whole thing. If we click the base, I can go up to component mode, click on miscellaneous components, and now when I click this, I can rotate the joint so you see the Z axis now rotates this way. I'm going to do it on this one as well. I'm going to select the joint. Maybe I'll hide the mesh to help select the joint a little easier. And I'm going to rotate this guy so the Z axis curls inward, and I'll do it on this one too. I'm going to rotate it so the Y axis would point up to be perpendicular to where your thumbnail would be if this character had thumbnails. The last step I want to do, I want to go back to object mode, and I'll parent all of these joints to the wrist. Some people like making another joint in the palm of the hand so you can cup the hand, but for my purposes this is going to be good enough. The last things we have to do is duplicate our left arm and move it over to the right hand side, and also we need a hip joint. We need to connect the legs to a hip joint. To duplicate the arm, I'm going to grab my clavicle and go up to skeleton and then mirror joint and go to the options, and we want to pick the YZ plane. If you look, we want to mirror it across X on the Y and Z plane. And I'm going to replace left with right and hit apply. So that looks good. It looks like it duplicated all of our finger joints. You can go ahead and delete the joint at the end of the fingers now, since we have the finger joint in there. But one thing you should notice is if we take a look at the shoulder joint or the upper arm joint for the right arm, the x-axis is going up the joint. If we go up to display, transform display, local rotation axes, you see that the joints are all going the wrong way. When you mirror the joints, it doesn't mirror the orientation properly. So to fix that, I'm going to select the shoulder joint, or I could select the clavicle because the clavicle is going to be off as well. We'll go up to skeleton, orient joint. That'll make all the joints go the proper way. I did get an error that showed up. Let's take a look to see what that error shows. It says something about non-zero rotations, the index, middle, and pinky. Okay, so my fingers have non-zero rotations on it. Let's go ahead and fix that up. You see these are the wrong direction. I forgot to freeze transformation on those. So let's pick our index fingers, all the knuckles. We'll go to modify, freeze transformations, and then when I have it selected, we'll go to skeleton, orient joint, and then now it should be good. When we oriented the joints, we got to redo the rotation for the thumb. So I'll go back to component mode, grab this, and rotate it about 45 degrees so it lines up. I'll do that for each joint of the thumb. And this one. I'll do it for all the joints except the last one. I'm going to hide my mesh so I don't accidentally select the mesh. Useful to have the mesh on a layer. You could put all the skeleton on a layer as well. So I'll delete this one at the end. We don't need that one. Oh. Go to object mode first and then you can delete it. There we go. And we know that these joints have non-zero. Their transforms aren't frozen. So I'm going to select them. Whoop. Oh, we didn't name our thumb joints. Modify, search and replace name. We're going to change index to thumb. Hit apply. And we'll select all of our fingers. Modify, freeze transformation. And then we got to rename the thumb over here. Modify, search and replace names. We're going to change index to thumb. Hit apply. Get rid of that one. And now our whole skeleton should be pretty much set, except let's put a hip joint in there for the pelvic bone. I'm just going to select one joint. I'm going to put it in between my thighs. Make sure X is 0. Translation. Whoop, we don't need that joint. Remember to hit enter to finish your joint chain. And we're going to parent each thigh to our hip. Now let's see where our hip joint, if you go up to display, transform display local rotation axes. Oh, it doesn't show up for me. Oh, yeah, it is. We want X to go up. So one way we could do this is we could just go to component mode and rotate it up like that. But that may not be precise. So I could unparent the thighs. Shift P unparent. And when I make this joint, I'm going to make another one. I'm going to click once, hold shift, and click another one. That way this joint knows which way to orient. It's going to orient up. And now when I delete the child joint, this joint still maintains its orientation. And I'm going to go from the side, take a look to see where my hip is. And your hip usually rotates from kind of the back of your pelvic region, not in the front. Let's put it over here. And let's parent my two thigh joints to my hip and hit parent. Now, for my purposes, I think this is done. I don't like having my hip and my spine combined together. This is often called the free root method of rigging a character. Now, if you want your character to be in a video game engine like Unreal, I believe you're going to have to connect the hip to the lower spine. So what you could do is select the child, shift select the parent, and hit P. That way your hip is parented to your lower spine. And then later on, when you do the rigging on it, you could get it to just rotate separately. So if we just see our joints and our mesh, you should see that you have enough joints to animate a character. These should be all the joints you need to animate your character effectively. So this was Nathan Webb. Hopefully you learned some things about joints and joint placements in a character. Thanks for watching.